Moses had a name associated with Egyptian royalty.
How do we know that Moses was really a part of the royal family?
Well, for starters, he was drawn out of the water by Pharaoh's daughter. And so the name Moses literally means born from or drawn from. And that's one of the things that's interesting is if you go back to the 18th dynasty and you look at the names of the different pharaohs, you find guys like Ka-Moses. You find guys like Ahmoses or Thutmoses, the first, second, third, and fourth. You get to the 19th dynasty and you'll find Ramses, which really is Ra, Moses. And all these names mean born of Ra or born of Thoth. And so when Moses is given that name, that's a royal dynasty name. It's a name that's coming out of the royal family.
Here we go again with those Christians stretching in order to validate their story. This gentleman just did some serious stretching. And first I want to go ahead and correct a couple of things that were just right off the whip that just needs to be corrected immediately. Immediately. Yes, in the 18th dynasties, you had a lot of people who had Moses in there. So yes, we have a lot of Moses in his name. The Ahmoses, like he said, Thutmoses, a couple of names of Thutmoses, but you also got your Hatshepsut, you got your Amenhoteps, and other names as well that were part of the pharaoh's names that were during the 18th dynasty. And here are a couple of more names that were reigning during the 18th dynasty. Now what I want you to notice is that there is no Ramses in the 18th dynasty, which he was correct about that one. But according to the Moses story had to have occurred during the 18th dynasty. But since Ramses' name is not until the 19th dynasty, and Ramses is supposed to be the pharaoh during the time frame of Moses, then the Moses story does not fit because the timing is off. As a matter of fact, the Moses story should have happened in around the 1500s BCE time frame, which even puts it well out of the time range of Akhenaten. So for all those people who say that, oh well, he was Akhenaten and Moses was Akhenaten. No, Akhenaten was a pharaoh. Moses was never a pharaoh, so therefore the name doesn't fit. Now, one of the other things that we do have during the time frame of Akhenaten, you have, and there's a lot of these names though actually, but during the time frame of Akhenaten, which is the primary one that you should focus on, is the fact that one of his visors was named Ramoses. Now, Ramoses and the name Ramses have absolutely nothing to do with each other. Ramoses and Ramses are not the same person. Ramoses also means Ra is born. It has nothing to do with being drawn out of water or anything of that sort. As a matter of fact, we don't even see Ramses II, which is supposed to be the Ramses that Moses dealt with, until the 1200s BCE, and that puts him about 300 years too late to be part of the Moses story. So therefore, Ramses could not have ever been part of that story, and it also puts it 100 years too late for Akhenaten to have been Moses. Now, Ramses also did have visors or generals whose name was Ramoses, but again, the reason why the Ramoses that was with Amenhotep the fourth, which changed his name to Akhenaten, makes more sense is simply because Akhenaten is the only Egyptian pharaoh who introduced monotheism as the oldest version of monotheism to the Egyptian people, and that only lasted for about 17 years. If you go to Egypt, you can go to the tomb of Ramoses, where you can see how this change occurred with Akhenaten going into the worship of the Aten, not an actual worship of the sun, but understanding that from the sun rays, life is given, and then that is the symbology of a universal one God that was not born, that was not made, and it is the one monotheistic God. Most likely what you have, because when you look at this, most likely what you have is the people who would become the Hebrew people took on the storyline, part of the storyline of Akhenaten, part of the storyline of Ramoses, and made Moses into the character to which that they were believing in, because this story wasn't written until around the 800 BC, 8th century, but these stories would have been told since around the 1200s BCE, which would put it in that time frame of Ramses, which is why they would add Ramses' name in there, because what we do know that happened somewhere between 1200 and 1000 BCE, you have the Bronze Age collapse. You also have Egypt losing the Levant as a vassal state during that time frame after they were defeated by the Sea People or the Phoenicians. And as we see during the time frame of this loss and during the time frame of the Bronze Age collapse and Egypt losing its power in the Levant, the most popular pharaoh name during that time frame were the names of Ramses. So of course, as they're telling this story, Ramses becomes the villainous pharaoh that had to have his heart hardened by this God to let the Egyptian slaves, the Hebrew slaves go free, and all these things happen. But when we look at any of the inscriptions, letters during the time frames of Ramses, the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, there is nothing about a calamity as far as all the 10 plagues that happened. During the time frame of Ramses II, there is no calamity. The only calamity that is occurring is the fact the Bronze Age collapse is happening, and that was most likely due to droughts, as well as Egypt is losing its power, its control over the Levant area, Sinai Peninsula, so it's losing its power. Those are the only calamities that were happening. There were no natural calamities that happened at all. And as far as the other stories that would have impacted the Hebrew people at that time frame, because the first time we hear about Hebrews is during the time frame around 1200 BCE with the Merneptah Stele, when Merneptah conquered a group of nomadic people called Israelites in the Levant, right before the Bronze Age collapse happened. You have the story of Emperor Sargon. Emperor Sargon the Akkadian, he was the first emperor is what most historians call him. Sargon birth story is a story of him being born by a priest mother, and then because she didn't keep him, she floated him down a river. He was later picked up by a laborer of the current king of Akkad, and that he became a cupbearer for that king, and he became a general, and then he took over and he established the first Akkadian empire, which the Akkadians become the Assyrians, and the Assyrians are the primary people who were just north of what is Israel, and they were the ones who were oppressing them all the way to the time frame of Sennacherib, during the time frame of Hezekiah, when these stories were being written down. So the Sargon birth story was implemented, as well as the fact that the mother goddess, or the primary deity for the Akkadians was Ishtar. And so Ishtar favored Sargon. So in their version of the story, the Canaanite god Yahweh then favored Moses, and then the whole let my people go story was then created based on that. But as we know, Egypt controlled the Levant during the time frame of the Moses story. So they would have left Egypt to go to more Egypt as a vassal state of Egypt, not necessarily escaping. And many of the Canaanite tribes to which they talk about during that time frame, other than the primary Canaanites, did not necessarily exist. But it is much later that you start getting the other Canaanite tribes existing, that the Moses story claimed that through Joshua and Moses, they went and conquered all these other people. The Moabites, people of Moab, were still a very nomadic tribe during that time frame. So the whole story is about them coming to the land of the Moabites and seeking passage and all that stuff. It's just things that they created, because by the time the story is being written, Moab had been firmly established as a kingdom. So it's a whole bunch of borrowing and, copying and pasting and twisting a little bit in order to formulate their story, because the Hebrew people were Canaanite people who were separating themselves from the other Canaanite tribes, and they needed to make themselves a bigger fish story than the other tribes, so they can establish themselves, because the Bronze Age collapse was causing those Canaanite people to move from the ocean, from the coastal area rather, into the hillside country where the Israelites were. So it's all fabrication, and these guys be stretching the hell out some stories in order to make it work. Ramoses and Ramsey has nothing to do with each other as far as their name being the same name, and the time, just the archaeological time, just don't match. So y'all have a great day, and remember always, you have to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibration.